Hello, welcome to CTM's discourse program. Welcome to Research Networking Day. Sorry for the delay. We had some technical issues, but it's all solved now. And we can start. It's early anyway for festival times. My name is Dalia Borsche. I'm hosting this day. I'm a musicologist and curator, and I've been co-curating the CTM discourse program for quite some years now. And we kick off this discourse program almost traditionally now with this Research Networking Day. This day is a platform for students and researchers from all over Europe, from various fields and disciplines, a platform to exchange ideas and experiences across boundaries of any kind. And as in the past years, we sent out an open call for papers and asked for submissions to present projects and research connected to the current CTM theme. As you probably all know, each edition of the festival runs under the umbrella of a broad theme. And the theme for the 20th anniversary edition is persistence. Persistence, of course, is an allegory for 20 years of an independent festival. 20 years, and yes, we still exist. But it's not about merely surviving as an independent festival. It is about the persistence of transience, as we called it. And we wrote in our theme text, the challenge in times of polarizing stances and simplistic rhetoric lies in cultivating persistence without tumbling into rigidity or dogma, in cultivating a steadfastness through a recognition of diversity, difference, and hybridity, while also embracing fluidity, uncertainty, and flux. With this festival, we want to embrace and examine transient as well as preserving forces in independent global music cultures and the struggles that come with balancing continuity and changeability. And we want to question or discuss how music and music cultures can face persisting and even growing fundamental and fascist positions. Actually, we never had so many applications for Research Networking Day as this year, so it was quite a difficult selection. But eventually we created this program for the day. You can see it on the program flyer. It's, if you haven't picked one, you can take it at the entrance counter. The presentations are arranged in 3 modules, as you can see, each with a different topical focus, and each module is introduced and moderated. The first one by myself, and the second one by Christoph Jacke, who is professor of theory, aesthetics, and history of popular music at the University of Paderborn. And the third module is moderated by Anita Jori. She is a researcher at Berlin University of Arts and scientific supervisor at Wilhelm Flusser Archive. And besides, of course, being excellent researchers and fantastic colleagues, Anita and Christoph both are chairs of important German-speaking scientific associations. Anita chairs the German Association for Music Business and Music Culture, and Christoph chairs the German-speaking branch of the International Association for the Study of Popular Music. And speaking of Networking Day, they both are downright network hubs, I would say. So I want to encourage everybody to approach them and talk to them during the breaks. Take the opportunity. The presentations of today will be very short, each 10 minutes only. And you will have time for quick questions after each presentation. And at the end of the day, we close with a final panel, including all the participants and the moderators. So if you don't manage to pose bigger or connecting questions and comments in these short discussions, after the modules, keep them until our final discussion. And of course, I don't want to miss the opportunity to thank all the people who were involved setting up this day, especially Thaisa Replansky for creating the event together with me, for discussing and exchanging ideas, Amelie Lill for the production, Elisabeth Enke and her team for the technical support, and Jan Rolf and Oliver Bauer, CTM curators and directors for supporting and pushing this special cooperation. So, let's start with our first module now. We picked 3 presentations that are dealing with questions like the relationship between humans and nature, the effects of climate change and ecological catastrophes, the questions of how nature will persist in an Anthropocene or post-Anthropocene reality. Our first speaker is Max Litjens, currently writing his master thesis in cultural analysis at the University of Amsterdam, and his talk is entitled Differentiating Future Imaginaries Through Eco-Grime. Thank you for coming. The stage is yours.
Thank you, Dalia, for the introduction, for the invitation to CTM Festival. It's my first time, so I'm excited for the coming week. I come from cultural analysis, and one of the characteristics of cultural analysis is that within research you always take sort of an object as the center of your research, and for the paper I'll be presenting today is about the album Freshness from producer Herbarium, released on the Ecofuturism Corporation label. Debates around climate change often tend to limit themselves to political action and technological problem solving. Essential as these solutions are, they risk approaching the environmental crisis from the same discourse that led to the exploitation of nature in the first place. One could even say that if we find a technological fix to global warming, we would reach the ultimate domination of humanity over nature. Instead of looking for political, economic, or technological answers, the environmental humanities argue for approaching the ecological crisis as a fundamentally cultural one. It is in this field where my object is situated, and more specifically, Freshness intervenes in the separation of the categories nature and technology. I will start by exploring how both the music and the visual fiction surrounding the album create a future imaginary in which the relationship between nature and technology is rethought in a more interrelational state. Following this, I will place this rethinking in dialogue with the eco-philosophy of Rosi Braidotti, which allows to see the potential of such an attempt. So I wanted to play a short excerpt of the first minutes of the album, and it isn't working from the laptop, so I'll play it from my phone. I hope it works. Okay, so that's to give you a sense of what the music sounds like. I hope my presentation can be put on the... Yeah, perfect. Yeah, thanks. Okay, so the sound spectrum on the album zigzags between natural sounds on the one end and electronic mechanical sounds on the other. Sounds of nature, like chirping birds and flowing water, as also present on the excerpt, are combined with swaying synths and pulsating bass lines. However, I argue, it is in between these two opposites where the most interesting sonic aspects of the album are located. Here we find a world filled with artificial interpretations of naturalist sounds and electronic sounds that incorporate natural qualities. The glitchy static in the final minutes of Elden Root sound like a mechanization of dripping water. On Dyron Frost, bird noises are robotized, and the tracks Venus and the Enchanted Land Recycle mix immerse you in a field trip through an electromagnetic imaginary that ends in the clicks and pops of something that could be called underground ecostatic. These sounds reside somewhere in between the natural and the artificial, make for a listening experience that does not ask the listener to attribute natural sounds to nature or high-tech beats to electronic devices, but instead immerses you in a futurist assemblage that is not concerned with origins, but envisions a new relation between nature and technology. So the futuristic character is not only found within the music. The label's self-proclaimed tag, eco-grime, described as futuristic dance music concerned with an ecological utopia, already steers the listener's encounter in a future-oriented state. Furthermore, the visual fiction similarly contributes to the future imaginary. In More Brilliant Than the Sun, Kotwo Ashun describes how the album cover, the gatefold, the sleeve notes, the label, all feed back into sensation, populating the sonic with audio hallucinations. The album cover of Freshness, as seen here behind me, is designed by artist and musician Greg. It shows a space filled with objects that can, similar to the music, be situated somewhere in the midst of natural substances and technological materialities. An ice-like substance is situated on a floor of white tiles, out of which fern and ivy-like plants are growing. Traversing the space is a spine-like string that seems composed out of a data-carrying liquid substance. Not showing what they are composed of, if they are alive, or how they grow, the objects blur the categories of organic, inorganic. Doing so, the visual fiction works like a portal that hints at a wider fiction in which categorical differences have disappeared. A fiction where both sonic and visual materials relate in an immanent, interrelational manner to each other. It is through this future imaginary that Freshness intervenes in contemporary ecological problems. Ashun identifies how futuristic music has the potential to break with dominant modes of representation and open up to a more fluid rendering of contemporary reality. Likewise, Freshness attempts to intervene in patterns of representation that envision nature and technology as separated categories. Examples of this could include a deep ecological approach that, by assigning intrinsic value to any form of life, still would rely on a separation of nature and culture. Freshness, instead, works from a nature-culture continuum and builds an imaginary that takes an affirmative stance towards the future. This affirmative approach is essential in understanding Freshness' potential. Where ecomusicology scholar Alexander Reding identified the concepts nostalgia and post-apocalypse as two central approaches within ecologically concerned music, Freshness starts from a radically different basis and takes an affirmative approach that is not based on a sense of loss. Instead, it takes hold of the future, through which it produces a positive rethinking of relationality. Such an imaginative and affirmative attempt is more in line with a Spinozist or Deleuzian philosophy that rethinks desire as not based on a sense of lack, but instead as a productive force. So it is in this line of thinking that the eco-philosophy of Rosi Braidotti is situated. Braidotti aims at a reconfiguration towards our complex surroundings. Western humanist thought, she argues, always positioned the human subject at the center, creating a hierarchy between men and all that deviates from this category. It is by ending this human exceptionalism that led to the dichotomies man over women, culture over nature, and mind over body, that such a reconfiguration can be reached. This would mean, according to Braidotti, a disidentification with familiar habits of thought and representation in order to pave the way for creative alternatives. Herein, she builds on Deleuzian processes of becoming that envision subjectivity as composed out of multiplicity, and argues for a becoming animal, a becoming earth, and a becoming machine. These processes of becoming are thus focused upon relational structures between human and non-human subjects. By extending the notion of subjectivity and placing it within complex systems of relations, Braidotti tries to foreground the middle ground of their interaction. Accounting for the interrelation between categories between the categories nature and technology, as found in freshness, opens up to see the symbiotic relation that alters the nature of each one. Of course, connections between technology and the environment have been researched extensively from the beginning of the Industrial Revolution and its devastating effects on the environment to renewable energy sources and its potentialities. However, to overcome our destructive relation towards nature, the solution might not come in the form of another technological fix. Instead, it is time to start thinking differently about both categories, seeing them as closely interrelated, leading to the collapse of a hierarchical dichotomy, could be better suited to overcome humanity's destructive attitude towards nature. This seems especially urgent in the context of contemporary technological developments, like artificial intelligence and the way these relate and will relate to environmental issues. The potential of creating non-dualistic patterns of thought and representation that subsequently shape technological and political problem solving could create perhaps more sustainable futures. To conclude, I'd like to address the need Braidotti recognizes to devise an adequate vocabulary that allows to see new figurations that refer to elements of our post-human and embedded subjectivity. Herein, she specifically identifies the potential found in the resources of the imagination. Precisely these resources are what freshness utilizes, by creating a future imaginary that rethinks relationality through a sonic and visual techno-nature. It attempts to construct such a language that can account for more fluid configurations in reality. And perhaps this potential is especially existent within the endless rearrangements and dynamics of electronic music. Thanks.
Sound on my mic, thank you. Thanks, Max, for this really nice start, a very hopeful example, actually, of an artist dealing with ecological issues. And I really like this idea of a nature-human continuum, like embracing technology rather than this idea of banning technology in order to protect nature as we can see it in very conservative areas. So do you think there's, do you have the feeling that there's an urge or among electronic musicians and artists to deal with these topics more than before? Or is this a very rare example you found?
I don't come across a lot of similar kinds of music, but like the last sentence in which I hinted at a possible way for electronic music to relate to these topics could also point at other issues, of course, that could be represented differently within electronic music. But yeah, ecological issues, I haven't come across that a lot yet, but maybe this is a first attempt. I mean, the album is released on a label, Eco-Futurism Corporation, and they have a lot of other releases. This is just one example, and they all take a slightly different approach, which is why I chose to focus on one album, because it's not like all the albums do the same thing. So there are some attempts.
Yeah, there are some. I think it's a growing interest, actually. Yeah. So, are there any questions from the audience to Max at this point? There's one in the back. Do we have a mic? Yeah.
Yeah? No? Yes? Oh, yes. Okay. No, I just wanted to point out that artists can deal with like ecological topics, not only like the music, but also like in like the format that they release music on, or I don't know, like I heard of this label that is like how they release music is basically planting trees, you know? And it's electronic music and it's really weird and cool, but it's, I don't know.
Sorry, I didn't get the last part.
Okay, that like their format of releasing music is to plant trees around the world. So you buy the record and say that you pay €5 for it on Bandcamp, and with those €5, there's like 100 trees planted somewhere, you know?
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, it's maybe the internet also provides these kind of opportunities. Like the album is also released only through Bandcamp, which also then functions sort of as a collective of all these different artists surrounded, scattered throughout the world, which without Bandcamp or other opportunities wouldn't come together. So yeah, there's a lot of opportunities, of course. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
And I think the question of the material of music, not only CDs and MP3s as well, and or digital culture is somehow material as well, and consuming resources, and like thinking about artists traveling around the world to play and all these things. I think there's a growing interest in these questions in global music cultures, and how we deal with these problems and how we get aware of the resources we use and for music releasing and music culture. One last question here, and then we go on.
I think the microphone's coming.
I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, okay? There is always have been like speaking from the point of view of Braidotti, and speaking from the point of view of also the label Ecofuturism and Biofuture Lab, and this idea of anthropocentrism is still there, that we are running in a paradox. Like at the end of the day, why we are doing this? At the end of the day, we are doing this for our benefit, human beings. So it's not, for me, I still consider it's not post-human enough. It's not, at the end of the day, it's still anthropocentric. And yeah, and I'm just thinking, so I don't know, what do you think about that?
That the post-humanist philosophy of Rosi Braidotti still relies on
No, I mean, yeah, the whole idea behind the eco, I don't know what, and nature, and future, and eco-future corporation, the label, and the philosophy behind it, it's still, I mean, it's still anthropocentric, because we are doing that, and they are doing that at the end of the day in order to serve human being. So we are taking care, we are giving, we are trying to give, to put ourselves aside and give the technology and the music a certain role. The object, we give it like a role in order to enhance the nature that we are, that in a way we are destructing it, but why we are doing that? In order to construct it in a better way, yeah? So you get what I mean? That it's it's still evolving around this anthropocentric idea.
Yeah.
And
yeah, that might be true. Yeah, I think like what the label is doing. I mean, sure, there are certainly still anthropocentric characteristics of their approach, but I mean, you could also try and see. At least that's what I try to do. Try and see how the label also creates new kinds of thinking and creates new concepts that could maybe overcome this anthropocentric approach. And yeah, I mean, it's not the answer, of course, but there are really interesting aspects to it, I think, and maybe through focusing on that, you could, yeah, there's opportunities to overcome it. But, yeah.
Yeah, maybe we will think about that even more in the next talks, because they're dealing with ecological questions as well. And then we have time after these talks and in the end to elaborate on these very important, bigger questions as well. Thank you again, Max, for your first presentation. And we continue with Sofia Bauer. She's from Cologne. She will present her diploma project that she is doing at the Academy of Media Arts in Cologne, where she's studying since 2013. Before, she was a student of African languages, literature, and arts, and that might explain why her project, Forescapes, is located in Africa, as far as I know. I'm excited what we will hear. Thank you for coming, Sophia.
Yeah, hello. Thanks for the introduction. As Dalia just said, my name is Sofia Bauer. I'm here to present my project Forestscapes. It researches the impact of colonialism on 2 forest landscapes in Kenya through sound. And to start, I want to explain you 2 different experiences I made which led to the start of this project. The first one is years ago. I made a weekend trip from Nairobi to Naivasha in Kenya. On the way there, you have to climb up the edge of the Rift Valley, which is a great, monstrous graben reaching from Israel to Mozambique. Is really great landscape. But the road up there is flanked by forests of conifer trees. Thick, tall trees stood in the morning fog and were surrounded by green grass and grazing sheep and cows. The air up there is quite cold, and you see people with padded jackets and woolly hats. I was amazed by this landscape, probably also because of the similarity to the landscapes of the Alps, which I know very well. In the car then, my friend told me that the trees I saw are not indigenous to Kenya, they are exotic, and most probably introduced by the British, the colonial power from 1895 to 1963. At that moment, I was not able to sense this context. Long before that, I listened to a podcast on radiolab.org, where a forest scientist called Susan Simard spoke on the communication networks of trees in forests. She explained the communication structure of trees between each other, how they speak via chemical exchange through a mushroom network and sound signals, and how they care for each other, how they nurture their seedlings and keep old trees alive. It is a topic which is quite popular now after the book The Secret Life of Trees by Peter Wohlleben. For me, this research of cognitive plants challenges the human-non-human relationship in a way that brings existing hierarchies to fall. Bringing together these 2 experiences, I wondered if they can inform each other in a way so that colonialism can be understood in a more holistic manner, which challenges the existing simplified notions of power, which are promoted throughout history and often are still in place today. In the 17th century, plants have been part of the European colonial and imperial cosmology. In their essay, Botanical Decolonization, Rethinking Native Plants, Tom Mastnak, Julia Elliott-Shah, and Tom Burlstove reflect about the writings of Francis Bacon, an English statesman at that time, and his ideas about the New World. For Bacon, colonization was an operation of planting and displanting rather than a military act. It was a multi-species project involving the uprooting and settling of plants as well as people and animals. Expanding scientific knowledge of nature meant expanding political rule. Andrew Sluter suggests in his book Landscape and Colonialism that European colonization brought together 2 ecosystems that had been apart from each other since the splitting of the mega-continent Pangaea 200 million years ago. The concept of landscape that emerged in the 17th century was shaped by visualism. It refers to a representation of the visible world. One tool that helped in the representation of landscape was the linear perspective. Linear perspective is a way of constructing a painting where the lines are fleeing to one stable and fixed line, the horizon. It makes it possible to represent landscape in a coherent way, which is validated by science and mathematics, and therefore claims a universality. It puts the viewer in the center of the image. That perspective undermines the individual and at the same time validates its centered position through scientific and universal laws. As Sito Steil suggests, this perspective helped in othering humans and non-humans alike. How to re-see and re-sense places and landscapes if often the view is constructed along the lines of linear perspective. Stephen Feld speaks of a reciprocity in our way of understanding a place. Places are sensed and senses are placed. We experience a place through our bodily senses. These sensations in turn shape the mind. And with this mind, which is shaped by senses, we understand a place and ourselves in it. Thereby, not only one sense is active, we perceive with several senses of our organism at the same time. We constantly cross-reference the different senses to understand a place. As well as immediate present sensations, we also put past experiences in the mix. Perception is full of memory. This gives us further orientation and helps us make meaning of a place. The different sensual perceptions Holger Schulze calls symptoms of existence. What are the symptoms of existence of a forest? For my project, Forestscapes, I'm looking at 2 forests in Kenya to understand the impact of colonialism on people, on landscape, people, and plants. To give you some detail, one forest is the Karita forest block, a part of the forest which I saw from the road. It is a plantation of the cypress species Cypressus macrocarpa, an exotic tree species to Kenya, which was indeed introduced by the British. The first record of this species in that area found in the National Archives of Kenya was from 1922. It was introduced mainly to serve the growing timber industry in the country. This species grows very well in foggy weather and on slopes. It can be harvested after 25 years, hence a very fast-growing tree. The area of 812 hectares is currently administered by the Kenya Forest Service. The other forest is the biggest area of tropical coastal forest in Kenya. The Arabuko-Sokoke forest is a biodiversity hotspot with species that only exist in this forest. It constitutes of 3 different kinds of forest: mangrove forest growing in the water, Brachystegia woodland, and Cyanometra thicket. Today you find traces from the colonial period in the forest, such as former logging paths, which are used as patrolling paths for rangers, or foundations of forest offices and planted mango trees. The Arabuko-Sokoke forest was taken over by the Kenya Forest Service in 1963 after Kenyan independence. It is now administered by both the Kenya Forest Service and the Kenya Wildlife Service. My approach for my project Forestscapes is to put into relation different oral materials to understand the complexity of the impact of colonialism onto these 2 forests, its people, its plants, and its animals. For that, I draw on interviews with people today living with and in the forest. I researched the past history of the forest from forest reports in the National Archives of Kenya, and I referenced the voice of the trees with ultrasonic microphones, super-sensitive contact mics, and ambient recordings of the place. I want to evoke an experience that resounds and reflects not only the present, but also the experienced memories of the past of the places. I understand this approach in a similar way as how we make meaning of a place by cross-referencing our senses. By cross-referencing the different sonic presences of the forest, I try to understand, rethink, reshape rethink and reshape the complex relationship between colonialism, people, places, and plants. The aim is to try to compose an ambivalent experience of the past, taking into account the agency of the different players in the constellation and reassemble the hierarchy in history. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, Sophia, for this really unusual and innovative, promising approach you presented here. I would like to talk about the methodology in more detail, but I think it's not. We don't have enough time in these 5 minutes, but I'm really interested in how you use the oral material, especially from the past, to draw your conclusions. But maybe that's something for the longer discussion in the end, or for the coffee breaks in between. Are there any shorter questions from the audience or from the other panelists before we continue? Yes, there's one. Okay.
Ask this question. So I don't need it. Ask the question, Dalia, concerning the methodology. That's my question too.
Okay, then tell us something about the methodology and how you integrate the oral material and how you use this material to and how you connect it with the other material you're collecting to draw your conclusions on this question.
Yeah. So this is still a kind of construction side in my process. At the moment I'm thinking of to construct a kind of sound archive, more like a sound archive, a vessel which holds these sound waves and which can be replayed. So the sound of the past, which from the archive are at the moment in numbers. They are really, as administration is, they are numbers of how many trees are planted and how many are harvested. I have also really interesting experience, documents of experiences, how the sound, or how people reacted to different sounds from for example, when the Maasai came into the forest, the Kikuyu who were living in the forest at that time were reacting to that sound. So I tried to filter out from the archives these kind of excerpts which refer to a soundscape, and combine them with the other material. But how to integrate numbers, I'm still a bit, it's still somehow working in my head. Yeah.
Work in progress, and I'm looking forward to following up your progress and your research, and I'm excited what you will find out in the end.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sophia. And now we have our last presentation for this module. It's Aladin Borioli. He studied photography in Lausanne, And after that, he came to Berlin to study visual and media anthropology at Freie University, Freie Universität, here in Berlin, a master study. And he is he's an artist dealing with the relationship between humans and honeybees, and that I found really interesting. And that's one of the major problems we are facing, speaking of ecological crisis. So I'm excited what you will present now. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for the introduction. Thank you everybody who's here. I will start with a short abstract. So, what you've just heard is raw materials directly recorded inside a beehive. It is an extract from a project called Hives, realized in collaboration with the friend and artist Laurent Gudel, who is unfortunately wasn't able to come today for the lecture, but he says hi. So, a film without images, Hives sits between a short documentary and a sound piece. This component focuses on the sense of hearing. It interweaves two human voices, the beekeeper Swaf Hassan and the neurobiologist Randolph Mansell, with numerous honeybees' voices. The film offers a sonic immersion into a refuge where, in islands, with technology, translation between analog sensoria becomes possible. It is a choreography between two Humboldts, two ontology, the one of honeybees and the one of humans, aiming to start a discussion and enable to think them together. It is also part of a larger ethnography which investigates the forthcoming of new technology into the world of beekeeping and how this could technologically enhance this age-old interspecies relationship of honeybees to humans and humans to honeybees. When I read the title of this year's CTM festival, Persistence, I thought immediately of my personal research. Even though more often described by my friends as monomaniac, my work has persistently been focusing on this relationship between honeybees and humans for several years. Broadly speaking, my research project called Apian has followed an ongoing and open-ended research which explored this relationship. Combining an anthropological approach and art practice, it investigates contact zones where humans and honeybees meet. The research project looked at how both species influence and mold each other, and on a larger scale, Gaia itself. The results are polymorphous ethnographies, which mix with different media, such as text, photography, sound, and video. Simultaneously, the outcomes span different fields, such as art, humanities, and politics. Apian consists of multiple fragments that are at the same time autonomous and related to one another. Once reunited, they create a sort of narrative universe which aims to offer refugia, places of refuge, for beekeepers, scholars, and honeybee, where translation between analog sensoria, the seat of the senses, become possible. The methods used for Hives are similar to my usual research. They mix an anthropological approach such as interview and fieldwork, in short an ethnography, and the continuation of my artistic practice. It also aims to be collaborative, to be para-ethnographical, a term coined by George Marcus, which means the potential working alliance with other sort of experts, with shared, discovered, and negotiated critical sensibilities. Moreover, my hybrid toolkit also involved the practice of beekeeping. I practice beekeeping as a part-time hobby and as a research method. Hives is also a sonic component of a written ethnography which explores the forthcoming of a new technology called electronic monitored hives into the world of beekeeping. In short, the ethnography explores technological enhancement of this relationship by means of electronic monitored hives. But what is an electronic monitored hive? Broadly speaking, an electronic monitored hive is a beehive filled with multiple sensors, with the purpose of tracking and recording bee behavior and inspiring to help beekeepers to develop less intrusive and time-consuming techniques. The recent drop in price of digital technologies enabled companies to offer a relatively cheap system and incidentally created an uptrend for homemade ones, hence spreading this technology into Western beekeepers' backyards. Such hives bring beekeepers closer to their bees by providing constant access to the colony through internet. Moreover, sensory collected data provides beekeepers with information which was invisible until now about the health and behavior of colonies. Sorry, just a few technical problems because the
toute la nuit, les vierges. Je pense que c'est les vierges qui font ça. Toutes les ruches qui veulent s'aimer, et elles font comme ça, toutes les reines. À la dernière, des ruches traditionnelles. Dans les boîtes, si tu l'entends, tu n'es pas vraiment l'entends. Dans les ruches traditionnelles, on l'entend toujours. C'est très fort. Première fois, je pense que c'est un canard. Mais après, j'ai découvert que c'est les reines qui font ça.
As I learned beekeeping with a deaf grandfather, the relationship of beekeeping and sounds wasn't immediately in my mind. However, through the ethnography, I realized that sounds and songs that bees emit are really important for beekeepers and scholars. The first digital sensor created was a frequency analyzer called the Apidictor. It was developed in the 60s by the UK beekeeper and sound engineer Eddie Woods. The Apidictor was designed to detect the specific sounds according to its frequency that a queen makes before swarming, called a warble, characterized by beekeepers as a loud noise and by Swafasan as a duck. Even though it is not largely used and entirely reliable yet, more and more electronic monitored hives are using microphone as sensor, with the aim to help beekeepers anticipate the process, prevent and catch a swarm before it flies out, and understand colonies' behavior. Hence, we see that there is a whole story to write about the use of sound in beekeeping, and also about the importance of sound when it's come to work with non-humans. To roughly explore this question, it's also to understand that common anthropocentric vision we have about sound. As Randolph Mansell, who is the second human voice in Hives, clearly said, "It is what we hear and not what bees hear. They feel the sound with their body and with their antenna." He is referring to the first abstract we've listened at the beginning of the presentation. This helps us to understand that bees are living in a radically different Umwelt than ours as humans. In addition, hearing and sound could be a great deal for understanding the human's relationship with non-humans, an important tool to investigate the more than human world we are entangled in. So I believe that experiencing sound through this project and experiencing it with non-humans helped me to move from an anthropocentric ontology and enlarging to something close to what the philosopher Graham Harman called object-oriented ontology. Thank you.
Thank you, Aladin, for sharing your artistic research on honeybees and humans. I find it really interesting that Sophia, as well as you're both talking about the importance of sound non-human environments, for trees and for bees, and to take sound as a vehicle to think about the relationship between humans and non-humans, humans and trees, plants and animals. So thank you very much for this impression. Are there any questions from the audience on this project? There's one in the front.
So speaking about Graham Harman and Triple O, maybe we can go further a little bit to Ian Bogus as well. Did you come to a certain conclusion to for this question? How is it to be? How is it like to be a bee or honeybee from your research?
Yeah, I mean, it's also a funny question because then I worked a lot with Randolph Manson, who is a neurobiologist in the FU and specialized in bees' brain. And it's in the film actually, but I wasn't able to show everything of it. But actually he's saying that in the beginning of his career, he was dreaming about becoming a bee during his daytime and also nighttime. And that's helped him a lot to kind of understanding the process and develop his own work actually. And yeah, I do believe that even though it's obviously will never be really achievable to become a bee or something, but it's something that we have to try in a sense that help us to decentralize us in the most possible. So yeah, it's a question that is really important in my work, and I try to experience it through different approach, like sounds or many different senses. And no, I don't know exactly yet. I never became a bee yet, but we'll see.
Okay, thank you. More questions for now, or I think that's, well, there's one in front. Christoph.
Thank you so much. And this is a stupid question because my field of research is totally different. So it's more a private question. But then again, concerning the research ethics, the ethical question. So what about interfering in bees' life because of all your technical approach?
Yeah, yeah. Obviously, we are interfering a lot, even though if it's sensor and everything, and it's not neutral. I don't feel like. I think it's a really important question, but even though it's also really important to do it, so we have to, to find the best way. I guess I don't know. For me, I resolved it, and I don't think I resolved it actually, but I do try to be democratical also by learning beekeeping and by, taking a great care about bees themselves as like any other species. So, yeah, I don't have a better answer for the technical question now, but we can, go deeper about that.
Hi. Hi. Also not part of my research area, but I wondered, we see a lot of discussion about the fluctuation of the bee population. And I wondered if there's anything in the sound of bees and their hives that tells us anything about the causes or the possible futures of those fluctuations.
I don't know about the cause, but for example, the sounds that a beehive produces when there is a queen or when a beehive queenless, it's really different. And so they're using microphone sensor to prevent or to also understand some kind of disease that bee could carry. So they sound differently if they have certain disease, and also sound differently if they have no queens or if they're being attacked. And so yeah, I guess sounds could become quite important in this subject, but yeah, I don't know more. I don't know if you can really find the causes through sound, but we can prevent maybe.